crazy stuff.
Yeah.
Yep.
And
All right.
Chris is just getting on as well. So I think we're all here and you could get started.
Seems fair. Chris, you on?
There
Yes.
she is.
Hey, Chris, how you doing? All good. All right, let me begin. We have a couple of very small technical things we need to do. I will call the meeting to order, and then I will ask our legal counsel to call the roll so that we are officially recorded. This is a special meeting of the commission called under the emergency laws of the state of California set up by our governor. So we are coming in under that premise, and someone's calling, looks like on the phone, on the screen. Do you know who that is?
Not ours, George.
It's not ours, okay. All right, sounds good. All right, I will ask our legal counsel to call roll. Take it away, Frank.
Thank you. Myra Alvarez.
Here.
Muntu Davis, not here. Monica Fitzgerald, not here. George Halverson.
Here.
Shana Hazen.
Here.
Molly Munger. We couldn't hear you, Molly. You're on mute. Molly, you're still on mute.
Am I now good? Can you
Now
hear
you're
me?
here.
Okay,
Yeah.
good.
Here now. Yep.
Whew.
Great.
Welcome.
Jackie Majors.
Here.
Chris Perry.
Here.
Okay. Before I do opening remarks, is there anyone calling for public comment at this point in time? All right, members of the public may speak up to 3 minutes on any matter concerning the state commission, with the exception of items appearing elsewhere on the agenda or items relating to pending judicial, administrative litigation, or personnel matters, and no action taken or by the commission may be taken as a result of the comment, but everyone is very, very welcome to participate. Okay, with that, I'll say a couple of quick things. We are in, first of all, it's a wonderful, wonderful idea for us to be meeting. It's a really good idea. A couple of commissioners suggested it. It was a really good idea. It's a very good thing to do. It's the right time to do it. And we may want to meet again before even our regular meeting. But we should take advantage of the opportunity that we have to meet and talk and convene and get things done in that context. The COVID thing is really ugly and it's really a mess. I'm active on several COVID things. I'm on the COVID Coalition. I'm on COVID Commission, actually, doing some stuff with the feds on some of the COVID stuff. And I'm working with a couple states on the COVID stuff. And the reason I mention that is because it's really ugly and it's going to stay ugly for a very, very long time. It's nasty. It is really bad. We are going to be damaged. We're going to be shut down at various levels. We're going to have a lot of sick people. Some of the new science is we might actually get some temporary treatments that are almost magical in their ability. Some of them have tested really, really well. And I've been talking to a bunch of the scientists in that space who are making progress. And it is possible that we will have some combination of good balances on this thing that will give us some respite and take some of the pressure off. But under best circumstances, those things will take months and months, and under worse circumstances, we're a year or more from recovery. And that's really ugly. And the reason that that is very relevant to us is because we as a commission, we are named by the House, the Senate, and the governor's office, and we as a commission have been entrusted with this lovely resource, to use it to help the children of California over time. And we need to figure out how to get the very best use out of that resource over time. And part of what we need to do is we need to be looking at our old plans and our old use of the resources and whether or not we are should continue to be on track in some of those spaces, because some of the things that were really good to do pre-COVID, there might be other things that we could do that would be more important now, and we already have a couple of those uses. So we're going to talk today about the resource that we're doing on the equipment. Our head of social services for the state, we have a request from the people who are doing the food banks to provide nourishment to people's bodies to stay in our Talk, Read, Sing mode and provide some books and some resources to provide nourishment to their souls. And that's a good agenda to be on. We have an opportunity to think about whether or not, as all of these daycare centers are shut down and going through misery and trying to recover, are there things that we can do? And one of the agenda items a little further down the road is, could we somehow maybe help some of those centers through the recovery by giving them either coaching or resources or something in that space? So we've got 3 items on this agenda that are immediate use of the resources, but my sense is that we need to, in addition to getting those kinds of things done, be thinking about and think as commissioners, what else can we do to make a difference in this space? And we have a master plan coming up for kids for California. And part of that master plan, Chris and I have been communicating a bunch on some notes in the master plan. Part of it is going to be anchored on early brain development and getting kids the right start, because we all know that if the kids are behind at a year old, the COVID disparity deaths for African Americans in this country, part of that goes, and the economic issues that go back for the Hispanic families in this country go back to not having the right neuron connectivity happening in the first months and years of life. And so all of that we need to be looking at, and in these COVID times make those situations even worse because the families have no resources and they're locked into tough situations. So the question is, relative to the master plan, are there things that we can do in our space that adds to the knowledge base and strengthens the start for children? And so what can we do to get the right start, early start for kids in our space as part of the agenda? So we've got a number of things to think about now, and we have an opportunity to do it. And we're blessed with a really great resource because we do have the states all over. I'm talking to state after state, and they're all broke. States are broke, and the states can't do deficit spending by law. They have to balance their budgets. So when they spend all of this money doing COVID stuff, that takes that away from other uses of that money and makes life really challenging. The feds can just print money. They can run deficits and functionally come up with new money and do debt, but the states can't. And so California is going to be facing some stuff. And so we have some opportunities relative to our resources at First Five that might be able to do something special in the heart of all of that grimness. And I don't know at this moment what that would be, but I think we as a commission ought to be thinking about how that could happen, and we should be adding that to our conversations for the next couple of meetings. So So we've got agenda items on this agenda that we can go forward with, and I'll turn the meeting over to Camille to talk about those issues. But I think in addition to that, we should be thinking about the longer agenda and where we go. And Molly, you and I have met a couple of times to talk about the agenda. Do you have anything you want to add to that?
No, not at all, George.
Okay. All right. Then I will hand it to Camille.
Okay, thank you very much. Good afternoon, commissioners. I hope y'all look healthy. Hope you're all safe and your families are good. Before we get started on the agenda items, I just want to quickly go over just one more time how we conduct these meetings, including the facilitation of discussion among commissioners and or public comment. First off, for the public at large or commissioners as well, if anyone's having technical difficulties, please send an email to info@ccfc.ca.gov. We have staff standing by will immediately assist you to make sure you're on board. You all are pros by now at doing Zoom meetings, but just a little bit of review to ask that commissioners to eliminate background noise. It'd be so helpful, which you all have been doing. If you mute yourselves during the presentations, and upon each agenda item, you'll be able to provide feedback and ask questions just as you normally would if we were all together in a room. You can either use the raise hand function in the Zoom webinar, or if you physically raise your hand, we will be watching and make sure that you're recognized. Jamie Hastings is here with us, as Simon Marquez, and they're helping to moderate what's coming in from the public, and we'll make sure that all commissioners are recognized if they've said they wanted to speak. Voting is going to be conducted in the same manner during an emergency meeting. They will all be roll call votes, so it's easier for us to keep a good record that way. And Frank will be calling for each commissioner's vote. The public will be muted during the meeting, and like normal in-person commission meetings, the public will have various opportunities to provide public input by, again, using that raise hand function on the Zoom webinar. And we will identify those folks, and then they will be unmuted and allowed to give their comments. And then finally, first, you have a number of First 5 staff who are also watching this Zoom meeting, and also will be able to provide input should they be called upon during certain points. Again, if anyone's having technical difficulties, send an email to info@ccfc.ca.gov, and we will make sure that we get started. So here we go. Just want to go back for a moment. George talked about public comment, and at that point we did not have any public comment, but I just want to check with folks to ensure that nobody has raised their hand. Jamie, Simon, anybody? Nobody. Nobody's there with public comment, so we'll go ahead and move forward. The other announcement that is normally made is the conflict of interest. So if by chance you have we should let the chair know if any agenda item presents or potentially may present a conflict of interest for you. And obtaining this information in advance ensures that we can announce that and announce your non-participation on an item. So
Camille, officially, I should ask that. If there are any conflicts, please let us know and we will deal with them at the time. Are there any conflicts that anyone is aware of? You're none? Nope. Great, thank you. Yeah, sorry, I should have done that.
Not a problem. With that, we're going to go to the action items. I'll get right to it. And as you'll recall, the protocol for action items includes staff presentations, questions from the state commissioners, public comment, deliberation, and voting by the state commission. There will be a 3-minute time limit per person during the public comment portion. George, if you're okay, I'll just go right to item 3, which is establishing this as an emergency situation. Oh,
Yes, please. We
Shayna,
need to
you-
do that, yes.
Shayna has a question or a hand up.
I did just want to jump in. I wasn't sure if you were going to be providing any additional remarks, Camille, but before we get started, I did want to just piggyback on what George shared, I think primarily about the unprecedented health implications, but also on balance to talk about and remind everybody about really the catastrophic economic implications and really the toll that it's taking on so many of the families that we are committed to serving. And I want to make sure that that's top of mind for everyone. And again, when we talk about families, it is those variety of diverse families in our communities, including undocumented Californians. And I wanted to share that in addition to the federal assistance that so many families have benefited from, beginning on Monday, California is rolling out the Disaster Relief Assistance Program for immigrants, which will provide $75 million to 150,000 undocumented families. And so I wanted to make sure we're thinking about that population as we think about our work moving forward. And yes, I think it's important that we think about books and the things that George was talking about in addition to physical health, and just to remind everyone that people are still really hurting and really struggling with basic needs like food and paying the rent.
Yep.
Thank you. Okay. With that, you're getting snaps from Myra. So, okay.
Molly, you have a reaction. Did you know that you can react with Zoom?
I didn't see that as an option this time.
Yeah, I guess they don't have it. I found it to be really helpful last time. So we'll just have to use our actual fingers instead of the cartoon fingers. Sorry.
Okay. So with that, we'll move to item 3. And that really is establishing this meeting as an emergency meeting. As you know, the main purpose for the meeting today is to request the Commission's approval on 2 items on extending the need to supply, I'll try again, on providing much needed supplies to childcare providers and families throughout California, to have a discussion about a partnership with Department of Social Services around book distribution, and as George alluded to have a discussion with commissioners about long-term, how do we help, how do we think about recovery from this crisis. The COVID crisis. However, in order to continue, we need to obtain the Commission's approval to conduct this meeting. The Bagley-Keene Opening Meetings Act defines the basis by which the public body may conduct an emergency meeting. Government Code Section 11125.5 allows an emergency meeting to be conducted under several circumstances, including, but not limited to, work stoppage or other activity that severely impairs public health or safety, or both. Crippling disaster that severely impairs public health or safety, or both. In light of the continued COVID-19 pandemic and supported by the Governor's emergency proclamation, First 5 California staff have established that an emergency situation exists and therefore requested this emergency meeting. First 5 California staff recommends the Commission approve conducting an emergency meeting based on the requirements for an emergency situation as defined by the Bagley-Keene Open Meetings Act.
Would someone care to make that motion?
So moved.
So moved, thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Second? All right, is there any other discussion, either on the commission or public about that? Hearing none, I'll call for a vote. All in favor, say aye.
Now, George, we need to do a roll call vote.
All right, let's do roll call. Yes, roll call.
Myra Alvarez,
Aye.
Dana Hazen,
Aye.
Molly Munger. You're on mute, Molly.
Again,
There you go.
aye.
Thank you. Jackie Majors,
Aye.
George Halverson.
Aye. We are officially convened, I guess. And
Yep.
that's it. Yep,
Yes.
all right, good.
So item 4, George, do you want me to go ahead or?
Yes,
or-
please, go, yeah, keep going.
Item 4 is a discussion around additional funding for distribution of emergency supplies. And I'm going to turn it over to Frank Pertek to present the item.
Thank you, Camille. Good afternoon, commissioners. Recognizing the devastating effect of COVID-19, the First Five California Commission convened an emergency meeting last month and approved funding of up to $4 million for a 60-day period to provide essential supplies to childcare providers and the broader community. As you will hear from Benito Delgado Olson from supplybank.org, First Five California and Supply Bank have worked closely together with the counties to determine what supplies should go out to the field. Based on that feedback, the first wave of essential supplies have gone out this week, including masks, cleaning solutions, and books, with the next wave to include millions of diapers and wipes. As George referenced, the need for emergency supplies because of the long-lasting effects of COVID will not end after 60 days. In response to requests received from Commissioner Member Perry, thank you, Chris, we are asking to extend our original 60-day period to include an additional 60 days to extend our distribution of supplies for those most in need. We propose extending our current contract with Supply Bank and will continue to work with the First Five Association to determine the most current need in the field with the goal of supplementing those supplies that are already being distributed through other funding. I would now like to ask Benito Delgado Olson to provide the Commission with a briefing of Supply Bank's current and proposed work. Benito, I hope you're on the line.
Yeah, I'm here. Good afternoon. And Murphy's Law is in effect today, which is why my webcam looks so great. So I apologize for that. I will get it replaced. So we worked with the commission team and to an extent the association as well to put together a very brief overview and PowerPoint to outline exactly where we're at and what the impact of additional investments would look like for children and families throughout California. So here's a very brief overview. As you know, on the 13th of April, the Commission approved the first $4 million allocation towards this program. We were originally scheduled to begin deliveries the week of the 11th of May, but DGS signaled they needed additional time to review. We received the final signed agreement on May 8th, and deliveries began on May 12th. And our biggest takeaway from that process and with DGS, working with Frank and Camille and their team, I know that the agreement went to them very quickly, but I also know that they are very much impacted just doing so many different things in response to COVID-19. And so the takeaway for the future was really that investing now will ensure stability for the summer, if that's the goal. Next slide, please. So this is just a brief overview of what the existing investment is doing. The first round of deliveries, which are currently underway, this was just a sort of stopgap measure for childcare providers to have some materials available to them until other investments being organized by the state went into effect. So a substantial majority of these materials are already en route or have arrived. For the second delivery, those are the quantities that we're planning to include. We may add a couple million nitrile disposable hand gloves, as several commissions have signaled to us that that's something that they need. For the third delivery that we're planning for June, we're going to work with the association, as a matter of fact, today, to gather some high-level feedback from different counties throughout the state, in addition to those that we've already talked to on the phone. And that'll inform what materials go out for the third delivery in June. So far, and this isn't complete, it sounds like cleaning supplies and PPE are things that are constantly being brought up, but we'll wait for that sort of small assessment to happen before we make that determination early next week. And just to give you an idea of volume, it'll of course depend a little bit upon what they decide for June, but this is probably going to be anywhere from about 2,500 to as high as 3,000 pallets of materials going out in a little over a 6-week period. So it's a tremendous amount of materials in relief going out into all the communities in the state. Next slide, please. So this is what the timeline would look like with an additional investment from the commission. We would immediately begin putting together a new assessment and evaluation in partnership with the commission staff and the association. This assessment would include a few high-level questions to gather some qualitative and quantitative data on the impacts of the program to date to help us better inform future planning. The first 5 county commission executive directors would be on point for this assessment, but they would of course be encouraged to collaborate with child care providers and anyone else they feel relevant to fill out the assessment to the best of their abilities. This would translate to 2 to 3 more deliveries through the end of August, depending on what the results of those of that assessment is. And we would work rapidly to put together a timeline through the summer so that we can provide as much notice as possible for local counties to be able to plan other existing efforts and parallel efforts in their communities and to combine them in some of the very productive ways we've seen happening in counties that started their own independent efforts a few weeks ago. The other thing I would mention, just because a number of counties have reached out to us and we're trying to make sure it doesn't create an administrative burden, but also that the opportunity is there, is we're collaborating with a couple of consultants to build an online system so that county commissions who wish to do so can add their own requests from other resources they have available locally to piggyback onto what the state commission investment brings in terms of an opportunity for tremendous bang for the buck and economies of scale. So we hope to have more updates on that in a week or two as well. Next slide, please. This is just to kind of give an overview of what an impact with the renewed or additional investment from the State Commission may look like. And lead time is really the most important thing here. For any of those of you who have experience in procurement, I'm sure this is familiar stuff, but I just put a few examples. I won't read all of them of what it looks like if you're going onto the spot market, i.e. you need something in a week or two, versus if you go directly to an ODM, original design manufacturer, and have a few more weeks to work with in terms of savings, which of course translates into much, much more materials going out into different communities throughout the state. Thermal thermometers is something we've heard a lot about, as well as the digital ones. That's one of them where, you know, not so affordable becomes much more affordable. And with an investment that's geared towards the summer, it'll bring these different types of opportunities to bear so that the results of the assessment, which will include prioritization of supplies that are needed, will be things that we can service and distribute out to the different county commissions and their partners on time and with a lot of predictability. On the right-hand side are just some other high-level points. We've already seen with the investment to date, even though deliveries are just commencing, that they're being leveraged tremendously with other local efforts and local investments. And then also, just to give you an idea, I know that the item is 4 million, but to show an idea of what 1 million could be the equivalent to in terms of volume of materials, I listed a number of things there. I won't read them all, but needless to say, it will provide a tremendous amount of materials for the targeted constituencies that we're looking to serve around the state. And just again, more lead time will bring a much higher volume of better price points and much more supplies for the broader community as well as child care providers. Next slide, please. And then just a last point is just that I think one of the biggest benefits of this is that it'll really help some of these local efforts that we've already been working with around the state for up to a couple of months. This is a Family Resource Center in, I believe this one's in Santa Clara County. And this is just, they're very active on social media, so I hope that's okay. I borrowed some of their pictures, but this is just one of the sites. They have, I think, upwards of 30 throughout their county, not just distributing diapers, but distributing all sorts of different types of supplies, materials, school meals, because they're coordinating with their school districts. And we're seeing a lot of this organic or sort of evolution of hubs within each community that are becoming the one-stop for low-income children and families. Next slide, please. Oh, and then this is just finally an example of how they're doing outreach for the respective communities in that county. I could only fit so much on one slide, but they have multiple languages, not just English and Spanish, and they've been kind enough to share their best practices with the association, which I understand is being disseminated to all the other counties that are interested. And that pretty much concludes the overview of where the program is to date and its impacts and what it could accomplish. I think the only other thing I would just add is that in our discussions with the different points of contact in every county, as well as the county commissions, we are starting to hear a lot more about the needs of the broader community. And so that would be something, should the commission approve this, that we would certainly include in the assessment to understand priorities lie in each county and try to tailor the program accordingly for those local needs.
Is that it, Benito?
Yeah, and thanks very much and happy to answer any questions.
Well, thank you, Benito, for all your hard work. I only have a few more comments and then we can open up generally to questions if you don't mind, Commission. So like Benito said, timeliness works or is essential, and we didn't realize that the previous contract would take as long with DGS. The fact that we do now have it approved and this request would be basically an amendment to that contract, we very likely could get the amendment approved in very short order. So that would provide that lead time that Benito referenced in his presentation that would help us maximize the ability to purchase at a much larger volume and benefiting the community as a whole. Now, if you would bear with me, I'd like to ask Marcia Thomas, our First Five Fiscal Director, to provide you with a snapshot of our unallocated account showing the additional $4 million investment and then reflecting our current total after that investment. Marcia? You're on mute, Marcia. Marcia, you're on mute. Yes, there you go.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes, we can
Okay,
hear you
good.
now. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Well, good afternoon. How are you? As Frank said, we have the money coming out of our unallocated account, which is our 0639. We did have a slide. Is the slide going to come up, Frank? No. Okay, so
The slide's coming. There it is, Marcia.
okay.
Slide.
There it goes. Okay, perfect. So as you can see, the $4 million that we previously asked for in April is shown in black. We did a second line item to show the ask today in green. And then it'll show you the overall balance for this fiscal year as well as 4 years going out. I don't know if you guys have any questions on the slide. Maybe.
Okay.
Any questions?
So can I just,
I'm so,
oh, go ahead, Frank.
I was on mute. I was talking to myself. I had a good,
Oh, no.
speech going on. So I'm sorry. I have to get used to the mute button myself. So we were just hoping to show you, commissioners, the impact of the additional 4 million on the total of the unallocated account for 1920 in the outlier years. So as you can see, the net year imbalance after the 4 million is 6 million, which is fairly low for what we like to keep over, and it gets lower during the outlier years. So again, the 4 million has an impact on the unallocated, but it doesn't put us in the negative in any given year. I think any other authorization from that account may have a more significant impact. But right now, that 4 million will put us in okay stead for the remainder of the next three or 4 years. But we just wanted to give you that view. So thank you, Marcia, for that.
So Frank, before you go there, when we do for the small counties that that we tend to fund every year to help them limp along in their agendas, where does that money come from? Typically?
So you can see that on the first line item, George, under prior year beginning balance. So
Right.
this year and next year, we currently have 4.4 million invested in small county. Our current projections for the outlier years 21 through 24 is approximately 5 million a year.
Okay.
So those figures do account for that, for continuing a small population county funding augmentation.
Right. I just wanted to point that out because that is one of the most popular things with, well, both the association, but also very definitely with people in those counties. So
And that is our,
as we're looking
that is
at
our,
as we're looking at our available resources and use of money, that seems like a thing that we're going to want to protect to the extent that we can.
Thank you, George. So thank you, Marcia, for that. And otherwise, Benito, Marcia, or I are happy to take any questions and answer to the extent that we can.
All right. Are there any commission comments?
I raised my hand.
Hi, Chris. Go
Hi.
ahead.
Marcia, could the 4 million come from another account? Just generally speaking, is there a reason you chose unallocated instead of a different account?
I don't know that could it, Frank, come from a different account? We put it in this account because that's where it was initially.
And it seems like, and Chris, to answer your question, the answer is yes, we can take out of any account. But as we look to the other accounts, each account has very specific ways to spend the money. That it's very, not prescriptive, but more prescriptive than unallocated. When you talk about supplies in general, we really don't have specific language in any of our given accounts to talk about using the funds for supplies. Unallocated seemed like the logical choice. So, right. And we had the 4 million in that account to do so. So we chose that account because it does comply with that more general catch-all language for other funding that you want to supply, and doesn't require us to do a more thorough analysis of whether it really complies with the use for media or anything of the specific accounts that we have in place.
And then back to small counties, when it's in blue, you're saying we will be coming to the commission at some point to approve this. So we're going to go ahead and show that as a potential expense, but not an approved expense. So when you're raising small counties, that's right, not yet decided.
Exactly. That is not right. That the commission has not voted to do that. However, the practice has been to spend that money at about that amount from that account. So I ask that it be displayed for that purpose in this presentation so that everyone in the commission can be thinking about that and be aware of it. But to your point, commission could decide 2 years down the road that this counties should go back to their original budgets and send them there. So that is an option, but that should happen at a future conversation of the commission on that topic. However, I thought it would be misleading not to show that at this point in time for this presentation, for this discussion. So I put it out there for that purpose. That makes sense?
And more, and more broadly.
Chris, did that make sense to you to do it that way? Chris?
Yes, it makes sense. It does. It totally makes sense.
Okay, thank you. Yeah.
So you'll see that in blue, Chris. You'll see other entries in the other accounts as well that are blue, and those just mean placeholders. Again, those are projected costs, but always subject to the commission approval.
Right.
George, Shayna has her hand raised to make a comment.
Great. Shayna.
Yes, so looking at the amount we've already spent and now, so $4 million, whatever, for 2 months, and then another $4 million for the coming 2 months, and recognizing that there is no sign that the need for these supplies will be going away anytime soon, at least not that I'm aware of. I'm just curious from staff's perspective, what the needs will be in early 2021 and into the next fiscal year, and should there potentially be more blue in that emergency supplies COVID-19 line. I just want to make sure we're being really thoughtful and not spending it all now when we know needs are going to continue likely for the next year.
Camille,
think,
do you want to field that? Go ahead.
Yeah, I think, Shayna, you know, we're all asking that same question about what do we spend now?
Mm-hmm.
What can we project in the future the needs will be? And I think it's, again, as you've said, I think we know that there will be needs in certain supplies, and I'm not sure specifically what supplies or what kind of action will be needed there.
I guess something that would be helpful for me to know is I assume that as centers are able, or any childcare providers are able to reopen and take on more children and then have additional revenues, they will be able to purchase these things potentially for themselves, although I know that, you know, supply chain issues have existed. So do you have a sense of sort of what that looks like on the ground, and providers being able to see their revenues going back to where they were pre-COVID?
I think that will take a while, just because the ratios are going to be smaller. So possibly the number of children they have may be cut in half,
Mm-hmm.
or more.
Mm-hmm.
And so until those, and not sure if we ever go back to those big numbers, but certainly I think in the foreseeable future, a year or so down the road, you know, you're going to see small numbers. So even if providers were, quote, fully had all the children they could take, it's still going to be less than pre-COVID. And so
Yeah.
we're going to, you know, we're going to have to adjust to that.
On that particular point though, Camille, if they have half as many children, then they need half as many supplies. And so that particular one is probably the most flexible and fits the need of the children. And it is going to be really fascinating. And that's why one of those later agenda items is for today is what can those sites do to survive and thrive and get what they need for cash flow going forward, and how can we help them with that? And part of what that cash flow will do would be to buy supplies for them
Right.
But
And
we need,
while yeah,
and we really don't know. And boy, the people who are working both nationally, other states, California, trying to figure out what is the new employment going to be, what's the new employment going to be in those spaces, what's cash flow going to be. Those are all really challenging issues, and nobody has nailed that even closely right now.
right.
But we need
And
to get that figured out soon.
While I agree some of the supplies will be cut in half, others will not. You're still going to have to clean the counter, several times a day.
Yeah.
Kids are there or 5 kids are there. So some of those needs will continue. Jackie had her hand up. Jackie?
So I was just going to ask us, as we're continuing to consider how we invest our money best, and I really appreciate this dialogue, because I do think this is going to go beyond supplies in terms of what childcare providers need. And I have a very real experience with it. Yesterday was sort of the beginning of distributing the $50 million to childcare providers in way of either direct payments or supplies. And so I think it's great, and I think the resources, they're never enough, but let's be clear that as providers are looking to come back to work or to save their businesses, it is not all about disinfectant. Some of it is, how are they going to come back, or if they're back, how are they going to continue to serve children in their current environment? If they're supposed to have less than 10 children, if they're going to have to try to create division in their space. People are starting to sell these, clear tent type things to separate classrooms to be healthy. So I would just say, and I didn't want to speak to this because I think supplies are in need now. I think the demand is lessening though. We have providers who, they had an option of getting a check, $65.89 per child in licensed capacity. Some of them took that check because they want to go to Target and they want to buy their stuff. We're buying big bulk supply, and so many of the R&Rs, we're giving them things almost too much to be able to handle. And so I don't know that that's necessarily going to be the way. When I look at $4 million additional dollars, I just, I wonder if this is the best way to serve the field. As we're looking at least for me, I'm looking at the 5-stage plan, and the fact that if folks are going back to work, they need childcare, and these childcare centers aren't ready to open. And so I don't want to challenge this extra $4 million necessarily, but I will say supplies is not going to be the biggest need always. And certainly now, while they're trying to figure out how to bring kids back into their environment, I think there are potentially some other ways that we could help them.
Exactly. That is exactly completely right. And we should be figuring out what those other ways are. And that's intended to be one of the later agenda items, is how can we add value helping those centers get back in business, stay in business, function, and do we have any insights, any wisdom, or can we hire someone? One of the thoughts is, could we hire some really smart consultant types, maybe you, to come into that space and figure out what should that look like, what should those pieces be, and how do we help them survive and thrive going forward, as opposed to just passing out supplies, but it's literally how do we provide wisdom, expertise, talent in that space. So and it sounds exactly, we'll talk again about it in a second, but yes, I think you could not be more right. But we need to figure out what is the most useful thing that we can do as a commission for those folks, because they really, really, we need them to succeed.
George, Myra has her hand up.
Yes, Myra.
Okay, great. Thanks again for this conversation. It seems that one of the things that could be really helpful in making sure we have the best information to make this decision is to have a clearer understanding of the wiggle room in the dollars. So the blue, and Frank, I'm looking at you. You don't see that I'm looking at you, but I'm looking at you. The blue text in the financials that's where we would come back and have to approve the budget, right? So that blue
Yes.
text exists in every single one of our accounts. So I think it would be helpful to have a better understanding of, for lack of a better term, our wiggle room moving forward. So that if in 2020, 2021 and 21, 22, we know where we can decide, no, we're actually going to reduce the smokers helpline. We're going to reduce the media contract. We're going to reduce, but that would be a decision that we would make together so that we can then have the information to then decide what sort of investment we want to make with that allocation, responding to
Sure.
Shayna's comments and Jackie's comments. Is that something that staff might be able to do? Like give us a clearer breakdown of the wiggle room? And I'm sorry, I don't have a better term for that, but whatever the blue estimates might be.
So Myra, I was going to say this in the next item, but I'll say it now. That's all right. We are hoping that commissioners will agree that in the second week of June, we would have, quote, a budget retreat where we would go over each of the accounts, looking at what's in blue, what's already, commission has already approved, what is being thought of or contemplated, where there would be revenue that decisions could be made about. So we have this last week talked with the Glenn Price Group, who does a lot of facilitation for us, to work with us to facilitate that budget retreat and have that conversation with commissioners so that folks have the opportunity to understand more where that flexibility could be, or where truthfully people will decide we don't want to spend this much. And we've said this, but maybe not. And so the hope is that again, we're looking at the second week of June, that the Aaron Price of the Glenn Price Group would be calling commissioners ahead of time, asking some questions, getting feedback, understanding, making sure that what information you wanted to make sure we discussed was available and in that discussion. So that is our plan at the moment.
It sounds to me like that's what you're asking for.
It is.
So
Yeah, I get that.
That's helpful.
At the very beginning of this conversation, what I said was that we need to now sit back and take a look at the fact that we're in this total COVID mess. And we've got these resources and we've got these prior patterns of use of our resources. And we need to sit down and say, how do we make that most relevant to the mess we're in now? What do we do to make that work out? And we need to do some really good, clear thinking about that topic. And we need to do it exactly as you just said. We need to take a look at what are we, because some things we're committed to, and some things we have just signed contracts or whatever. Other things, though, we've got flexibility, and we also have a new need, and we have a need that we didn't understand a short while ago. And frankly, we will understand that need a lot better when we convene in a few weeks with that meeting, because we are all getting a lot smarter in COVID every day, and we will be much more informed on both what we need to do and what the state needs to do at that point in time. And so that, yes, that sounds like a really, so let me just jump out of sequence a little bit into, does the commission want to go forward and do that meeting? Is that something that we should plan on doing? And would you like to us to make that happen as a commission?
So George, I think Chris had her hand raised as well before. You might want to.
Okay, Chris, great. Yeah.
I actually think Shayna had her hand up before I did, if I'm not mistaken.
Okay, sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just want to echo what I'm hearing multiple people say, and particularly Myra, which is, I feel like I need more context about all of the options available to us. And I think as I look at, this account, right, the $4 million is pretty material, right? And if we're, continuing to, put out $4 million for supplies or other things, and I think, what Jackie is saying is maybe there's a need for supplies, but maybe that isn't the most urgent need. So I would feel more comfortable giving us a little bit of time to catch our breath, recognizing that that first $4 million and those that first run of supplies are just starting to get out the door. And it sounds like from Benito that we do have a little bit of time because this would be an addendum to the existing contract. So I just ask if we can be a little more thoughtful.
Chris?
Mhm.
Hi. Yeah, a couple things. Number one, yesterday, the state operations center pushed out 5 million masks. That was announced by the governor on Monday, and they went out yesterday. So those, I would love for you to factor that into your calculus as not maybe as necessary as it seemed just a couple of days ago. And then we had also talked a little bit about formula in previous meetings as one of the high needs indicated in surveys. And it wasn't brought to us as an option in the previous approval because it's expensive, and to do formula would have cost as much as doing all of the other things. And so I wanted to raise it again here, having seen how supplybank.org is able to reduce the cost of something with enough lead time. What, if anything, should we do about formula? And then last but not least, to follow on with Shana and others in terms of being sure we're making the absolute best decision at the best time. I think maybe that extra week or two between now and our next meeting might be wise. There is quite a bit of activity on the supply front. I think Jackie was also notifying you that there were 3 buckets for supplies. There was the 50 million from the state treasury, from Department of Ed, that's out there. Then there was the money the masks that went out from the state operations center. And then the third bucket is the first 5 commission. I just think because those 2 other buckets have started to move money out, that it may make ours somewhat, it may mean that we want to tailor ours more in some way. And then last but not least, I think there are families themselves. So we are talking about providers, childcare here, which is critical, but it is going through a definite shift. But families with young children are either with their children more, under incredible economic distress, or other kinds of new challenges are presented to them that are about basic needs. I would just say, when we think about all of these supplies, we might want to think about the families also, in addition to the providers, because they're taking on more of the care of their own children if they were working full-time or have more than one job.
That's exactly right. That's kind of what Kim Johnson was talking about as well.
And I think that's what we're hearing from our colleagues in the first 5 counties, that it really is now the broader community that they are hearing more from, which are families that could really use help and support in that way. So what I hear you all saying maybe is, so first, before I go anywhere, Benito, do you have any response to any of the formula question you want to talk a little bit about? Chris, so you know, we've been going forward with investigating what we could do about formula and figuring out how we could maybe reach out to the manufacturer themselves and see if we can get a reduced price. And so we've been working that way. And certainly in our presentation today, which didn't make clear, certainly formula could be one of the ways that if the commission chose to at this point go forward, we could certainly consider what we could do around formula as well. But I'm hearing maybe waiting might be the way to go.
Benito?
Yeah, happy to comment on formula. So the existing agreement actually allows for that. It's part of what was approved by DGS with the final agreement. We've had a couple of meetings with a gentleman named Roger Bird, who's the SVP for U.S. Nutrition at Abbott, which is the manufacturer of Similac. We went to them because Infamil, which some of you may know is the company that works with WIC in California, has been substantially back ordered, but Similac has more capacity for a variety of different formula products. Simplistically, the way the formula business is structured is a cost loss item on the surface. So in other words, if you look at their distributor catalog, a 23.5 ounce canister of formula is about $26 and a few cents. That's comparable to what you would pay at Target or someplace like that. However, when Abbott sells that to a big box retailer, Amazon, etc., they ask for a marketing or inclusion into their marketing campaign, and then that's when they receive deep discounts in exchange for that, which reduces the price. The only other time they reduce the price of formula is through WIC, which is a long process to establish. And so we had another virtual meeting with him, and I know Camille and I have talked about it too, and we're putting together a letter, as I understand it, that will go directly to Robert Ford, who's the chair and CEO of the Abbott company and has some local Berkeley roots. And so we're going to send that over to him. I suspect we'll receive some sort of response that will be helpful, whether that's giving us the same accommodation with assurances that this won't dilute their market, or a large donation to be coupled with a purchase that would have the net impact of a substantially reduced price. Typically in situations like this, when they realize it's a statewide effort, it's for a specific population, it's embedded into existing government systems where there's reasonable assurances, it's assisting low-income children and families. Organizations like this try to do something to come through. And so we expect to have a draft of that letter done today, and we hope to send it out very early next week. And I understand from Camille as well that their local government affairs person for California has been connected in as well. So we'll see where that goes. And certainly more time is fine on our end as well. The only thing I just wanted to clarify is that every day that we do wait delays what would happen subsequently, or if there were an agreement, it would force us to move more towards the spot market, which is still substantially cheaper than anything that would be in store. But to give you an example, spray bottles are typically back ordered about 6 weeks right now, and there's similar types of considerations. So you know, that's up to everyone here, but I just wanted to be crystal clear that it's certainly fine to wait, but if we wait a few weeks, the timeline will go back a few weeks. So just so long as everyone's comfortable with that.
Have at least one for public comment, or Jackie, you have your hand up as well.
Did you want to do public comment first, or you wanted me to?
Why don't you go ahead?
Okay. You know, I really appreciate all that, because I know that whenever we make a delay, it, you know, pushes back everything. What I'm hearing and what I just think even more than ever now that I sort of process everybody's thoughts is I just think we need to know what we're doing and what we're trying to serve. And I think Chris may have said this, you know, one is an intent to serve providers who are serving families, and one is the potential of serving families directly. Many of those diapers, and I hate to talk with such direct experience, but I just did a, you know, 120 provider distribution caravan. Many of those providers are giving those diapers directly to parents. Some providers provide diapers, but the majority of them, when it came to the diapers and the Similac, were giving them to parents. They were sort of a conduit for that, I would say, for that group yesterday. But I just want to say this as food for thought. there are very few providers that are, I mean, I think we just got a list out for LA County that over 50%, if not higher, I think it's much higher, I just don't have it in front of me, childcare centers are closed. So that number has changed drastically since the last time we met. I don't mean to seem, you know, sort of crass about it, but they're not closed because they don't have a spray bottle. They're not closed because they don't have some of these supplies. Some of them didn't feel safe staying open because they didn't have some of these supplies, but there's so many other things that are keeping them from opening. And so when I go back to sort of this question, who are we trying to serve and what is our intent? I just would love a little bit more understanding around that, because I think it's all good. We need it all. It's really important. But with the limited funds we have to do, what kind of impact are we trying to make? And I just feel like maybe it's just that I need to understand what our goal is.
Do you want to go to public comment, George?
Yes.
Okay.
Public comment?
Okay, we have a couple now. So the first one is First 5 Early Learning is what you're listed as on our computer.
Hi, yes. Good afternoon, commissioners. This is Wendy Mahaney-Gurhu. I'm the Deputy Chief of Early Learning at First 5 Santa Clara County. I want to thank you on behalf of Jolene Smith, our CEO, and the County of Santa Clara for the amazing effort you have taken on behalf of our providers, the children and families that they serve. I just want to give you some context for what's going on in Santa Clara County, which may inform this decision and the next decision. Pre-COVID, we had 1,434 centers and family childcare homes open in our county. Today, we have 492. Of the 492 that are open, 47 are center-based and 445 are family childcare homes. The corresponding numbers in children are, generally speaking, when we were pre-COVID, 16,500 children served. Today, around 4,000. One of the things I really want to talk about is exactly what commissioners were saying, and it applies to this and your next conversation. They are, in particular, large family childcare homes are asked to operate with 4 less children. Actually not asked, required. That works out for us about $8,000 a month that is not coming in, and the same amount of care and general operating expenses, rent, utilities, is required. So they're struggling on a financial level. We have certainly been partnering with you, with the City of San Jose, the County of Santa Clara Board of Supervisors, to do funding for items, but also financial relief and our philanthropy. We've been securing around $250,000 for financial relief and debt recovery so they can open their doors. It's really important to understand that when the workforce goes back, if we're not ready, the workforce won't go back. And so it's important, and I urge you to really think about what is the best way to spend this money. Is it in supplies, or is it in financial incentive relief for the providers, in particular the ones that stood up, the family childcare homes? I thank you again, and no matter what you do, we are so grateful to be a part of the work that you do.
Thank you very much for that comment. Is other public comment? It seems like I see a name on the screen. John.
Hi, this is John Sims. I'm the interim executive director of the First 5 Association of California.
Right.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for allowing me a few minutes to say a few words. First of all, I'd like to echo those comments of thank you for the current $4 million of materials purchase that you have out and underway in our communities. As you've heard already, that first wave is starting to reach the counties. And First 5 California is making a difference in those areas. And you're really the first wave of money for the 0 to 5 community on the scene in many of those counties. So thank you for even considering this second wave and for the other things you'll be considering later in this meeting. I just wanted to take a minute or two to, first of all, recognize and acknowledge the comments that were made about the importance of counties and the importance of the small county augmentation program. the association really considers that, as I hope you do, as really the operational foundation of the 0 to 5 network in our 58 counties. Continuation of that program is a high priority for the association. And in a very short political science lesson, the counties were created by the state of California, and they are an administrative arm of the state of California. So since 1854, the counties have been building these teams around health and social services and schools. And in the last 20 plus years, First Five has shown up on the scene to really become the backbone of that team for the 0 to 5 program in counties. They're serving as chief facilitators, and serving many times as funders for these programs. Now, voters, when they approved Prop 10, decided to use that county structure to continue to provide services. And I've listened to you today talk about what are the financial impacts of the financial decisions we're making now to help with COVID into the future. And I applaud your efforts to sit down in June and take a look at what it means long-term for those programs. And I hope when you do sit down in June that you'll continue to place a high priority on small county augmentation as you have in the past. So thank you again for what you're doing. Thank you again for being so forward-looking in where you're heading and what you'll be doing to support the counties, not only during the COVID crisis and beyond. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much for the comments. Okay, that brings us back to the topic. And the topic recommendation right now is that we put some additional money into renewing the prior funding. Are people comfortable doing that? Should we reconsider the amount? And if we're reconsidering the amount, should we think about raising it and adding nutrition, or should we be thinking about maybe reducing it or bringing it down for any level? What is the wisdom of the commission on this topic? What should we do?
Myra has her hand up.
I don't have like the answer to that question. It's a very big question. And I would love us to all talk about that. But one thing to consider, and this goes to Jackie's point about, you know, what are we prioritizing, childcare providers or families, and knowing that that there is no picking between that, right? Like we want to do both, and we're considering ways in which we can support both. But I do want to, for background and context, I want to highlight for the commissioners that may not have read ahead in the packet just yet. There was a survey that was conducted of 600 California parents by the Education Trust West, us, the Children's Partnership, and a number of other advocacy partners that found that 36% of those families were either reducing or missing their meals. Parents were reducing or missing their meals in order for their kids to eat. Yeah. And I was stunned at that statistic, that more than 1 in 3 families that were surveyed, and these are families that filled out a survey via the internet. So we already knew that they were somewhat more connected, that 36% of them, the parents were missing or reducing their meals, just hit me like a ton of bricks. And I know that our folks on the ground see this every day, and those of us that are advocates are somewhat removed. But to the extent that we can consider the opportunity to support nutrition for many of our most vulnerable, I would urge us to do so.
Chris, do you have a comment?
Well, I'm just reading the motion statement, and I think it's vague enough, which is a positive thing. I move to approve $4 million from the unallocated account over a 60-day period to provide local communities with necessary supplies. So I feel like that is written in such a way that the provider parent they're both part of the community, would potentially address this area of interest, where the commission would like to dig in a little bit deeper into who first to serve or who best to serve, while keeping front and center that there's always a bit of a lag and some in ordering and getting things to communities. So without putting this off, maybe by having it phrased this way, that addresses that. I think that other concern around the dollar amount, it's an up to. It's also that, and the way this is written for all of you, it's written in such a way that it's an up to amount. So it doesn't have to be the biggest amount. So I think those are both strengths in the motion statement when I think about what we're trying to accomplish here.
Yeah, really good point. One of the things we were talking, one of the next items on the agenda, Kim Johnson runs the food distribution program for the state right now. And she's getting food into those low-income families. And she actually asked us to come up with book packets for the low-income families, because she basically said that right now those families are getting the food, but they are then going into very challenging settings where there's some real difficulties, and she wanted the comfort of books in those homes, and she wanted the parents to have the joy of delivering the books. She said she's not delivering joy with the food, but we could deliver joy with the books, and that we could do something that would make a real difference. So if we really cared about the families, what we really need to do is make sure those families have an optimal resource. And so she said, clearly we've done the good work on getting the Talk Read Sing campaign to get people to appreciate the need for books. She said those families are ready for that and asked us if we could come forward, and that's why that's on the agenda for that. And she said the emergency is right now. The families are in the closed settings. They're locked in with the families, and they're over half those homes are book free. And so she said that what we can deliver here is absolute joy to some settings. And she said, how many times in your life do you get a chance to deliver joy? So I know, Chris, an earlier note you sent me, you're very much in favor of us going down that path. Kim is totally down that path, and frankly, Ann O'Leary is in favor of going down that path as well, because those kids so desperately, and those families so desperately need something to brighten their day and also something to do in those settings. So that's, we're jumping ahead on the agenda item, but if we're gonna, we might think about being a little more vague on the supplies, but try to, because of the emergency status of the food distribution, what she asked us to do was something that when they distribute the food, they could take books home with them and get the double. So that's the upcoming conversation on that topic, just for context.
But that's great, and I think this is a narrower, more specific ask that.
It is, yes.
And I think, I don't want to conflate the two, because, that's not how we agendized it and that's not how it's written up. But I do think this point about what the supplies are, food versus cleaning supplies or diapers and wipes, for whom and how much, is a lot to process. And so I think for this group to just focus on those variables within this one agenda item is kind of a lot to grapple with before we even get to the next agenda item.
Yeah, I totally agree. I just wanted to put a little bit of context in there, but I totally agree with that. And so we need to figure out, what are we going to do about this agenda item? And that's why I asked a minute ago, what do you think?
So Molly has her
Molly?
finger.
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Am I? Okay. That's why we call it an emergency meeting. This has been an emergency that's been unfolding. Yeah. It was unfolding in a way last month that has slightly changed since this, till this month. We've learned things. It's good to be nimble. It's good to get in there and do the best you can, and then take the learning, and I think that's what's happened here. We we went in there, we put in the supplies. We have a little bit more information now, and it's shaping how we're feeling, and that's fine. I would like to see us not go forward with this $4 million item now, but commit that we are going to put a placeholder in there that we all want to spend at least $4 million in some way that we can work out with more information to support the communities that are so impacted by this closure of the childcare centers, the pushing of the children home, which isn't, a bad thing in of itself, but it's, difficult for parents. They need support. The locus of our work may be shifting to homes instead of to centers. I mean, this could be happening, but rather than try to figure that all out today, could we just postpone perhaps the motion or whatever procedurally we should do? I don't want to lose the $4 million in support to families and communities at this time from the unallocated account. I think that's a good expenditure. There's definitely an emergency here. We should spend that money. I do agree with that. But I think even though I agree with Chris that the motion is vague, I'm afraid, Chris, that it's not vague enough, because in order to get it done, we have to make it an amendment to a contract. And to make it an amendment to a contract, we kind of, there's lots of things that are going to have to be the same. And I just think, it's a good thought. I think you and I are thinking of it the same way, which is how do we not abandon this? But, so I'm kind of persuaded that we can't really approve this right now. And then I'm looking for the way that we can be sure we don't lose this commitment that we all feel very strongly about. So
can I ask, so if we went out, we had planned on going back out to our first 5 county partners to survey them, to see what, to see the needs of current, as up to date as we can, to come back to you. Like we said, we know we are going to do a budget retreat. If need be, we can obviously put an action item on if we have more information about how this 4 million, the need of the community. To Chris's point about the vagueness, one of the things that we wanted to honor as well was there would be flexibility in the counties. They know what they need. They know the larger populations versus childcare providers, and so giving some flexibility there for them to distribute those supplies to places where in their own communities are the most hard hit. So what I hear you all kind of in a roundabout way saying is possibly waiting, getting some more information about the absolute most up-to-date supply needs and any other information that might help you understand who this funding would be serving. Right now, as Chris said, it's people in local communities. It's as broad, I think, as you could get, but maybe having more information will help that decision. Shana has a comment, George.
Yes, Shana.
I appreciate, Camille, everything you shared, and I think that's aligned with my thinking, and it sounds like with others as well. I do wonder if we need to get back to Jackie's initial question about so I know we're talking tactics now, but at the strategic level, is the goal to support families more directly or providers or both? And I think there's a way to do both, but I think that's an important question because the way we respond will look different.
Jackie has a comment. George.
And Shane, I really appreciate that because I was thinking very similarly. Yes, I think we need more information, but if it's a supply-driven survey, it doesn't allow us to think through sort of our mission direction.
Yep.
And so I'm happy to go. I think everything is needed. And so I'm happy to go to the pleasure of the group, but I really feel like we need to kind of figure out what are the needs we are trying to serve. We can't serve them all. But I think we have an opportunity to serve some very, very specific needs. And I think we need to understand that, again, even prior to or to informing what that survey would look like, so that we are extracting all the information that we might need to make our decision. I just feel like we need to know where we're going.
Yes. And that seems to say that we should be scheduling another meeting of this group because we don't seem to have the answers to those points today, and doing it relatively soon, within the month or within weeks to set that up. Does that make sense to reschedule or do another meeting?
So
Well, I think
George, go ahead, Molly.
Molly, yep.
I think we have consensus that we should have the budget retreat that you mentioned,
Yes.
which
that's
will
true.
also help inform the thinking, and that would be, I think, a very helpful meeting. We can look at the budget, and we can also think about how is best to, where's the best place to move here, that, without losing too much time. We're losing a month. But I guess I'm going to look at that as, that's the month we lost just because you can't move something like this that fast through the state government. Right now, supplies are flowing. So we're not really losing, people are not getting things right now. They're getting things, and they will be getting things, and that's good. And we're there with, the first wave. I like the idea that we're the first wave. So I don't feel like we're leaving people in the lurch by postponing for a month to look at the budget and think more, because you guys are the experts. I do not know the answer to these questions, but I'm listening to you and trying to reflect back what you're saying, which is we really need to think about what our best options are. And I trust you and others to give feedback into the staff, and Camille will come up with something and help. It'll be iterative. I think it'll work.
Can I ask a question? Because
Yeah.
I've heard you say, we want more, you really kind of want to make this decision about which way to go, serving providers versus families versus a combination. What do you need to help you make that decision? What do you need?
And that might be something that we have at that planning retreat. So the question is, what do we bring to that budget retreat? And we need input from everyone to do that.
Well, Camille, let me, if I might, let me respond to that question. Because to me, obviously the budget's important, but I think we understand basically that we have the capacity to spend $4 million on an emergency basis out of the unallocated fund to support people we know are hurting and that have been heroes, whether they're community essential workers or they're, low-income people that are really suffering the worst, whatever it is, that we know who we're trying to help. And it is, of course, a mix of both providers and people. So the first thing we need to know is, we need to know that we have money available. And given that we have a mix of people we want to help, then the question becomes, what are the pipes through which we can put the money to reach these people that are up and running quick? Because the point of spending unallocated money in the middle of an emergency is to get the help to people fastest and to take advantage of something that we have as First Five. First Five's not the richest group around. We don't have the deep pockets, but with luck, we're faster because we can go in there when other people are tied up in red tape and other people are worried about other things. I think the book work with Kim Johnson is a very good example of this, but we ought to look for something similar where we can find another kind of an opportunity like that, where there's pipe open, people are doing great work, and we can put some resources to what we care about through that pipe. So maybe it turns out that First Five Association, we go back to them and they have pipe. Maybe it's somebody in one of the agencies. I don't know. And as I say, others on the call may have better ideas. But I think if we just go look for pipe, since we know we have the money and we kind of know who we want to help, that you'll come up with good options, and then we can talk about them.
Good point. Jackie?
Chris, her hand up, and Jackie. Chris and Jackie.
Chris?
You're on mute, Chris.
Appreciate the question. Yeah. Appreciate the question, Camille, about what it is we want or need to make the decision. And I think what Molly just said is critical. There's a structural element to this. You know, how do you move it out? And I think that kind of leads to the partnership question that I think is another key part of this. I mean, we've been presented with the supplybank.org partnership in our first wave, and I think that's great. I know that's sitting there available to you. But on the distribution side or on the funding side, I would like to know how we might partner with some communities in order to grow our investment a little bit, or match, or somehow incentivize this attempt at providing critical resources to communities. I know many groups are not in a position to make a financial contribution, but maybe we can partner with our county commission partners or something that would allow us to not only help with the distribution, but also help with accumulating the resources necessary to buy them. And then last but not least on that point, I think keeping overhead at a minimum very low. For me, that's really important, that we are not spending very much of the money on administration or, you know, any of these sort of overhead costs. I think we can lose a lot of money before it ever hits the pipe. And so partnerships, additional funder partnerships, and keeping the administrative costs low would be important to me, as well as knowing what people need.
Okay, thank you.
Other points?
Anybody else? Jackie had her hand
Jackie.
raised.
So I was just going to say, I know it's probably harder than me saying this, but I just think we have to make a decision. And the reason I say we just have to make a decision is because I don't think we have a lot of time. Providers and families are in need right now. And so when I think of making the decision a month away, while this supply thing may be on ice and ready to go at whatever point, if we're talking about other kinds of supports, that's not on ice, and that might need to be developed or have partnerships. I'd also be curious to know who else is doing what. So Myra mentioned the need of food, and we're hearing that from a great deal of our community. And part of that is there are resources, and trying to connect them to the resources and the people that are providing food and creating access to them. And one of the things, and I just want to give this example, because we don't want our help to create problems, right? And so, for example, though the provider supplies have been amazing, some of the communities have been struggling with, where do I put all these pallets? Where do I house this stuff? Where do I store them? How do I get them to these more rural communities or centers? And so, you know, we can't just say, not that this happened, but, oh, we're going to bestow you with $4 million for this, and aren't we great? You know, I think we have to also be in partnership to think through that whole piece and how it's really getting to the people that we are designing it for. But it was a bigger question around who else is doing what, so we can find that sweet spot. If we only have $4 million, how is that going to be the biggest bang for our buck? John Sims talked about, you know, just the providers, and he was speaking to some of the things I was sharing with earlier. These providers have to reopen. These stages or these phases of businesses going back, retail going back, means childcare need is greater, but providers are less available. It's
Yeah.
like the pendulums
Yeah.
are going two separate ways. And so thinking about if there is a way that we can create more local flexibility around support and funding of our small dollars to be able to support some of those folks in getting back. I don't know what that looks like, but I think it's just about us making a decision. And if it is all supplies, let's make the decision and figure out how to do it well. But I think I would like to encourage us to, I don't know what it looks like, but meet sooner so we can make a decision so we can get money flowing to the EC community or families.
Okay. Other comments?
Myra has her hand up, George.
Myra?
So given the urgency that is now, and that we know we have the 4 million, we know we have that. We are still evaluating the additional amount that we can consider and make an informed decision about. Is there any appetite from the commission to move that 4 million now, given that supplies are important, given that people need something now, that we can move it quickly, knowing that we're going to evaluate an additional amount of money when we meet in June? The only reason I say that is that we took the time to be part of this meeting. It would be wonderful to walk away from this meeting with something concrete that we've invested in. So like the last time was the 4 million, perhaps this is the 4 million and we're going to do more at the next one. And it's cumulative. It's going to be, X amount of million. But I want to be mindful of taking this time and this opportunity where we're talking about how important the need is and actually acting on it today.
Well, I don't myself feel that we're not going to be acting on it, because I think we're going to be able to address something important that we're doing through indeed the food banks to help children and families. And I think that's very important. I think that's very important. And I think that it's not meaningless work at all. My own feeling would be that a month from May to June to deal with getting a little bit more information, a little bit more understanding, I think will be so much more effective than if we try to push this now with the various doubts that have been raised and the various problems with it. It just sounds to me as if we're better off approving the other proposal and putting this $4 million onto June. I am going to hope, I'm going to be very, as one vote, very committed to approving the $4 million goes to help what we're talking about. I just haven't heard yet today a proposal to help that's quite ready. And that's not because the staff didn't do exactly what we told them. It's because the facts changed underneath the feet of the hardworking staff. And God love the, Benito. I mean, everybody's been great. It's not anybody's fault. It's what should happen. It's what should happen. You should do the best you can when you're driving in the dark. And then when you get a little bit more light, okay, well, no, the road's over there. Got that. I think I'm not uncomfortable, and I don't feel we're going to be, I feel you're worried that we aren't going to be doing enough soon enough. And I share that sort of emotional feeling, but I think we'll be better off doing it just 1 month later is not going to be break or make, and doing the wrong thing, overloading people with pallets that they can't use, or trying to get supplies to centers that are mostly closed, or just a lot of complexity. It just doesn't seem that, it seems like the world is a little different than it was, and we just need to respond to that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I respectfully disagree. I do think a month is a lot of time to get supplies into the hands of families. And I absolutely support the idea of books through food banks. I actually thought that was a brilliant bringing together of our agencies to distribute. But no survey have I read that has said families want books right now. like you think about the hierarchy of needs, and the hierarchy of needs, that's a nice to have, not a must have. And I'm just want to be mindful of that. I will support, I'm just one vote, I understand, but I would have liked to see us move something more urgent than that. So I will stop talking.
Shayna has her hand up, George.
Yep, Shayna.
It's a question actually for Benito, because I hear what Myra's saying and also very much agree with Molly. And I'm curious, if we were to wait a month, would there actually be a month where families would not, or where centers, providers would not receive supplies? Would the lag be that long? Because I hear that maybe what Myra is imagining, and I'm curious if that's actually the case. So if we were to say a month from now, yes, we are ready to give you $4 million to distribute supplies, do you anticipate any lag in those supplies getting out?
I'm going to try to answer that very simply, but it's kind of complicated because it depends on what we're buying and distributing. But I think the shortest answer is that we did put some flexibility into the agreement so that if we are in a serious time crunch situation, we can pay higher prices and then reimburse them through our contract to get supplies out the door immediately. And for some of the items that we're distributing this week, that's exactly what we did. And so we therefore paid anywhere from 30 to 40% more than we normally would. It's not a very sizable percentage of the initial amount. It's material, but not that big. So certainly if the commission came back in a month and decided they want to do this, we could still maintain 2 more months of deliveries. It's just what would probably happen in the first month is that we would pay more and distribute less. And then the only other thing I would add is just, I hear the concerns on pallets piling up. We haven't encountered that yet through this program, but deliveries did just start. I know there's dozens of efforts all around the state and probably hundreds and thousands across the country. But particularly with the association's partnership and one-on-one calls with the R&Rs and the county commissions, they've been doing a really good job about utilizing local warehousing and things like that. But those are real concerns. And I would just add, my brother runs a childcare center, so I get what you guys are talking about, and happy to answer any other questions.
Other comments?
I don't see anybody's hand raised. I think it's time to kind of wrap it up here and move on. So kind of have 2 trains of thought here as far as I can tell. One is wait a month, come back in June, more information, and given all the, I'm not going to go back over all your comments, but given your comments, more information. Do something now, knowing that there is a lot of flexibility built into the motion that can help address some of what you've said. So those are kind of the 2, I think, options you have in front of you. We're happy to do what the commission wants to do, but I think y'all have to make a choice now about how you want to proceed.
We could not, if we do not act at all, then, but we are set up to have that planning meeting in June, and the next time we would have a chance to act would be that meeting.
Yes.
So we have, yeah, we can decide to act now, create some flexibility, or we can decide deliberately to put that agenda on the topic for the meeting. What is the will of the commission? What What should we do at this point? What do you think?
Chris, you have your hand up? Or
Oh, she's moving.
you're muted. Sorry.
Sorry, I did that again. I know not to be muted. I want us to not only believe that we're going to do something, but do something today that's specific to food here, maybe, and do more digging and research on supplies. And I say that because if we're going to approach the next item that's not about food or supplies and approve that, and then we didn't address these basic survival needs that families are facing around hygiene and food, I feel like we'd be out of balance. And so I just really encourage us to look at the amount we said we had, the fact that we want to support communities, the fact that we know food is on the next agenda item and that there is a way to distribute it. That I think there's a way to address many of these concerns and maybe not go as high as 4 million and give ourselves time to address some of the more granular issues between now and June to come up with it. So we're using some of it now and some of it later.
So doing 2 million maybe for now until we get to the June meeting?
Some kind of a compromise that allows us to move ahead on something. Yeah. And not, it just would feel very unbalanced.
How would 2 million feel to the group? Make sense? 1 million, 4 million. 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. I don't think anybody wants to go over 4.
Nobody wants to go over 4.
Well, I could be wrong.
Okay, could I just ask Jackie to address this? Jackie, could you just tell us what you think about this? Because I'm amenable. I don't want to spend money doing something we shouldn't be doing.
Oh my God, no, I can't. Because I was going to be the last one to talk this time because, I just don't know that I don't know that all these supplies are what people need right now.
What about if it's food though?
Yeah, but how, and that's what I don't feel like I have enough information, which is why I was like, I will go, everybody needs everything. So I will go with the group. I just feel like we're not really prepared, certainly, to do another 4 million for more supplies. I would say I don't support that. But, a portion of it, fine. I mean, I think that's easy. We can do that, but I think there's a bigger something here that we haven't gotten to. And I know everybody's struggling because it's like, we want to get there, but how? And we want to be thoughtful, but fast. I get it. I don't have the answer. I'm sorry. And I will say to Benito, I'm an R&R and we made it easy for you guys. There were palate issues. We just figured it out for you really quickly because we needed the stuff. But so
would you think a million now would make sense and then get us to June?
Well, there's some logic to that, which is give Benito the go ahead to do at least one more month and keep the pipe open as Myra and Chris are saying, keep that coming, and then we can talk more in June without them losing anything. The urgency would be addressed that way.
Okay.
So
does $1 million make sense to people? Should we try that?
Because that covers the month.
Yeah, another month, another open month.
$1 million. I'm still stuck on the for what. I want to, echo that there is an urgency here. There is a significant need. What I'm hearing from Jackie is that need may not be for supplies. So to say, well, just because we want to do something, that we would do $1 million for supplies when maybe that's not really where the dollars are needed, doesn't feel great to me. I know that based on everything I've read and seen on the ground, there is a need for food, although some of that need for food also has to do with some supply chain issues with food banks. So I just think we need more information. I don't think we have all of the information we need to be able to make the most informed and impactful decision.
Okay. Makes sense. So one of the things we have decided is that we are going to have the meeting in June, and we are going to go through a process of looking at our options, our needs, and then we're going to do some survey work before that, both with the commission and with the counties and with a number of other sources to get a sense of what kinds of things we need to do at that point in time. Yes.
You got Molly and you have Myra.
I was just thinking of a motion that might work.
Good.
You know, that if we were to move, that we allocate $1 million to be spent as rapidly as possible to alleviate critical nutrition and safety needs in the community of low-income people with children under 5. And we were to authorize that to be done either as an extension to the Benito, I forget, supply bank contract, or through some other existing state agency, state or local agency or consortium thereof. We could address the sense of emergency. We could get $1 million out in health and nutrition and safety money, and give Camille and her team $1 million to go talk to people about. Look, I got $1 million from the commission the other day. What's the fastest, best thing you can propose to me on this? And you know, anyway, that's my motion.
Okay. Is there a second to the motion?
Shayna had her thumb raised. Shayna, will you second?
Was that a second?
I was agreeing before you were asking for a second, and yes, I second.
Yes, and second. Okay, we have a motion, we have a second. We should now have a discussion, and then we need to ask for public comment. Yes.
This is related to the motion. I think it falls under the description of Molly's motion. Given that we, and I know this is the next item, but that there is a distribution channel through food banks, is there potential to utilize that distribution channel? And sorry, Benito, this is going to impact you. Is it possible to use that distribution channel for formula, for example, like for using the food banks to distribute formula along with books? So that's another, this is part of that question about what are the channels of distribution that we have at our disposal. I don't want to say disposal, but like.
That's a really good question.
Staff talk to us about that a little bit.
Yeah, that's a really, really good question, because they are already interacting with the people who need it the most, and they're getting stuff to them. So we could ask them if we could be supportive in that space as well.
And I'm assuming that would fall, that flexibility, once we understand, would fall under the motion that Molly just crafted.
Yes, because it's an existing agency or consortium thereof that's working in the space.
And I think we, just to say,
Does the second accept that? Is that an acceptable amendment to the motion? Ask Molly.
That's a question to you, Shayna. George just wants to be sure that you're okay. Yeah.
Yes, she says yes, George.
So the mover and the second both have accepted that as a.
And I believe Chris
did you comment as well?
And just to clarify, I know that the Department of Social Services has contracts with 50 food banks in California. And that you're aware of that because you've described it somewhat in the next item. But to answer Myra's question and to just give a little granularity to the motion, that consortium network exists via contract with the State Department of Social Services. And I am certain that they would welcome additional supply going through their network.
Okay. All right.
And for the record, it can't be finances that are supplanting existing levels. So to the extent that the food banks are providing formula, we can't supplant whatever they're already doing. If there is an indication that there's additional supplemental need, then we can talk in that way.
But that just makes it in my mind, then they're the perfect partner, because they wouldn't want a supply that they already have, that they would already distribute. They would only want us to provide something they didn't have. That would be the checks and balance right there, because they wouldn't want it.
Create a unique role for us. Okay. All right. Are there any further comments? I will call that to a vote in just a second.
No.
Any outside?
I'll need to have.
What?
Okay,
I'll need to have
Frank?
the motion statement repeated one more time. I'm sorry. Just so that I have the record correct about the motion statement in the second. So it is up to $1 million from the unallocated account. And then Molly, if you could finish the rest of your motion statement.
To support either the extension of the existing supply bank contract pursuant to the original motion, or to provide support to nutrition and safety to low-income families in California that have children under 5. Through either an existing state agency, to Chris's point, which includes the food banks, or a consortium thereof of state and local agencies and a consortium thereof, I think I said.
Okay.
It just to expand our, options.
Frank, are you okay? You look like.
I'm just wondering, through Benito's organization, or are you looking elsewhere?
No, in the alternative, because
in addition to.
Benito's already got a contract and he's doing a good job doing it. We were considering today a $4 million extension of that. It's turned it into a complicated topic. We decided that we're going to meet a month from now and hopefully have a little bit more information about how best to proceed. But for right now, we're authorizing the staff either to put another $1 million into that contract per the existing motion, or find and make a partnership with another state agency or local agency or consortium thereof, who are already serving and able to deliver quick support to the nutrition and safety of low-income California families with children under 5. And leave it to the staff now. I mean, I'm content with that. Let Camille and her team figure this out and come back to us, and she'll know more after she does a little bit of questing about.
Frank, are you okay with the motion? Yes, Frank's okay.
All right.
George. I think you need a roll call vote.
Yes, let's have a roll call vote, please.
So do you want to ask for public comment on that, or are we ready to go?
Is there any public comment?
Yes.
Yes, there's one.
We have one. Melinda.
Okay, yes.
Melinda Margiotto.
Oh, looks like you're on mute, Melinda. There you go.
Can you hear me now? Thank you so much. I'm calling from Riverside, and I want to start out by thanking all of you for your many, many efforts. I concur with what Jackie was saying in making sure that if they are being met through other agencies, that we not consider using the same amount of money. And the other thing, Jackie, you had mentioned that providers were able to accept $65 or the supplies. And I'm not sure if that was directed just towards state-funded schools, or if private family and private for-profit centers had that option as well. But what I could say is, a month ago, finding toilet paper was really scary. Now we're able to find toilet paper. So from my perspective, from some of the centers, they do have some cleaning supplies and they're not in the shortage that it was. But if they were to offer $65 per child, that could go towards their rent or their mortgage or utilities to sustain them being open, that possibly in your June meeting, you would consider something like that. And again, whether if the family daycares or private centers differ from the state funded centers. So again, thank you so much for all of your efforts, and you guys are amazing.
Can I clarify? I just want to clarify. Melinda, thank you for your comments, and thank you for the work you guys are doing. The $65.89 per child was the calculation that was given through the $50 million from Governor Newsom to the R&R agencies to distribute to providers. They could take that in a direct payment to be able to buy their own supplies, cleaning supplies, everything related to safety, not anything else. Or they could take a portion of that and get supplies from their R&R. And so I just wanted to clarify that that wasn't from First Five. First Five was the $4 million that's being distributed in another way.
Okay, George, I think you can have a roll call.
George, you're on mute.
All right. Okay, let's do a roll call vote. Yes. And I vote yes.
Myra Alvarez. Okay. Myra Alvarez.
Aye.
Shana Hazen.
Aye.
You're on mute. Yeah, there you go. Molly Munger.
Aye.
Jackie Majors.
Aye.
George Halverson.
Aye.
Okay, you're it, George. Motion carried.
All right.
Okay.
Excellent. Moving right along. Moves us to, we have a couple of more agenda items. One of them is the Family Book Distribution Partnership. I think, Camille, you've had a couple of conversations with Kim Johnson about that. I would say that I had a conversation with her as well. She is definitely asking us to help. She is distributing food now effectively to low-income families, and she would like to add to that distribution books for the lowest to the very youngest of those families, so they can take them home and add that to the learning opportunities for the families and also to the emotional well-being of the families. So I salute their effort. I think it's a great idea and a good fit for us because of our Talk Read Sing campaign and our literacy campaigns. So with that, other comments, other questions? Camille, would you care to present the status?
That'd be great.
Go for
Thank
it.
you, George. I'm going to reduce what I had to say. Erin Doobie is also on the line to help reinforce what George has already keyed up for us in this item. We will go on to say that leveraging the key partnership with the Department of Social Services and food banks, First Five California can contribute to ensure high promise to children that they have access to early literacy supports and that their parents are engaged in literacy development. We see this as a strategic opportunity to align with the governor's parent agenda and support the Surgeon General's goals to increase community-based family engagement and reduce the achievement gap. Funding will be used to build community-based efforts to distribute books by leveraging existing local infrastructure and relationships to make books available to families of young children when they access a local food bank. County agencies, which may include a county First Five, a library, or other community-based organizations, may apply to become a local program administrator. We, in our discussions with the folks who run as Chris mentioned, I believe 46 food banks in the food bank network that work with social services, said to us very clearly that we would need to have help in the distribution of books, that they alone as a staff don't have the capacity at the moment to do that. So what we would look for is a lead agency in each participating county or group of counties to ensure that the books get distributed to the food banks and pantries throughout the county or region. We would package the books. There would be 3 books in a package, and we believe that will be enough to either add to or start a library for the family. And we'll include an early literacy tip sheet for parents that counties would be able to customize local resources and other services. With survey results reporting a rate, as we've heard from Myra, as high as 37% for food insecurity in California, the need is great, and this program aims to reach 600,000 households with young children birth to 5 at a cost of $6 for books per family. First Five California will leverage its existing contract with Fraser Communications to purchase multilingual, culturally competent books at cost. We've identified some funding there. Through this proposed partnership with Department of Social Services, California can reach food insecure families with an effective early literacy intervention through a trusted family touch point. Utilizing existing First Five California infrastructure and leverage funding, this can be implemented in a cost-effective and efficient way, resulting in a high-impact, low-investment program. A total investment of up to $5.5 million would achieve this goal, with $1.5 million being existing money already in contract with Fraser. The First Five California staff recommends the commission commit up to $4 million in one-time funds from the education account to launch the California Family Book Distribution Partnership. It's very short. You have more information, I believe, in your item, including background of why we believe this is important for kids to have books in their household. You've heard it many, many times. And the partnership, we had a call yesterday with the food bank people from social services. They are anxious to work with us. We know we have a lot of details to work out and to figure out how to get this done, but both agencies are committed to making this work and be as effective as possible.
I have a question.
Yes. Please.
Camille, you mentioned that something about the food banks don't have the capacity to deliver the books or distribute the books, and therefore we need to find another agency. I didn't understand that.
So up until yesterday, we were not aware that there may be a capacity challenge for food banks, for some of the food banks. So in our discussions with them, they said that that would be a challenge for them. And so in trying to figure out how best to, to get the work done, we think we can go to our existing, to existing partners within communities to help do that. Erin, do you have any other information from that conversation?
Yeah, hi everyone. I think that you basically explained it, Camille, but they just really don't have the storage space. And when we think about trying to save administrative costs on shipping, we really need to ship in pallets, and pallets are about 6,000 books each. So when they don't even have, in some cases, enough storage to be able to store the food that they have. And then the other option that was brought up, which is actually using the trucks that distribute the food, but Department of Social Services said that was not a possibility either, because there are a lot of federal regulations. This is food that's coming from the federal government, and so there are regulations around weight and how those are transported. So we ended up deciding that we really needed someone to work with the food banks locally. And we know that there are a number of possibilities within counties like First Fives, libraries, other community-based organizations that would be able to receive these shipments of books and store them and then get them distributed as they are needed. Or, you know, they can work with the food banks to maybe set up a table. So I could see like a local First Five wanting to go once a month and hand out books to families with young children, and also provide some additional resources, sort of set up a little table or booth to get families to connected to other resources as well. So that seemed to be the model that would probably work the best.
Is there any precedent that we know of for the food banks cooperating in this way with people who want to use the food bank as a way to get things out, like health information maybe, or voter registration, or whatever it might be? Is this something that food banks do?
Yes, we know that some of the First Fives already collaborate, and I'm sure there are other organizations as well that collaborate with their food banks, and they do, they have done some book distribution, and they have offered other resources in that way, like I said, through maybe setting up a table or something, and doing, you know, sort of an event maybe once a month or something. But those partnerships are pre-existing, and I think it's important as well to expand beyond the reach of Department of Social Services, which they absolutely agree with, because their network of food banks is, I think there are 48 of them, and they cover most of the counties, but there are thousands of food banks in the state. And so they were really encouraging us to branch out and work with the California Food Bank Association and others to be able to reach more food banks and therefore more families.
Was this discovery about the complexity of the logistics the thing that caused the administrative expense to be as high as it is in the proposal?
Yeah, so I think that it was something that we didn't know until we spoke with Department of Social Services yesterday morning. And so that, you know, caused us to have to sort of change our model. Now, I think that the initial proposal, there were always going to be administrative costs beyond just the cost of the books, because we have to consider the packaging of the books into sets of 3, as well as the shipping and the distribution. So those administrative costs were always going to be there. I just don't think that they had been called out until we finally spoke with Department of Social Services and were able to get sort of a better estimate. And those, I think, would really be an up to. We would certainly look to cut administrative costs wherever possible. But I think you'll notice in the proposal that even though 1.9 million looks like a lot of money, when you break it down, it's really only, it's under $33,000 per county on average. And distributing can be costly because shipping and packaging and all those things, and just the manpower to be able to make deliveries all cost quite a bit of money.
And all of that is what's in the $1.9 million.
Correct.
The shipping, packing, et cetera, I see.
And the other thing that we added was we've asked Fraser to create a customizable one-page flyer for parents that would include tips on early literacy, some of the talk, read, sing information, connection to early brain development concepts. And then the counties themselves would be able to customize that flyer to include local resources such as libraries and story times, really whatever is, you know, best meets their needs. And then they can package those, print those on their own and package them with the books. So there's that little bit of family engagement component that is customizable, but the printing costs would be on the counties. So that would be part of that administrative cost as well.
Thank you.
Sure.
Other comments or questions?
Just building off of Molly's couple questions is, and maybe Aaron, you can answer this, or Camille, I'm just a little bit confused. So the write-up sounds like the partnership is pretty clear and the food banks can make this happen, but the discussion seems to be the opposite, that it's not possible, and that they don't want that we have to look at the Food Bank Association instead, and that they may not have the capacity to distribute the books, and instead it's going to be tabling. So I'm a little bit confused. Can the food banks include like 3 books as they give the bag of food, or can they not? And maybe it's not that simple, and that's fair.
Yeah, so I think we initially thought that it was pretty simple. I think the partnership with DSS is very clear. They are very interested in partnering with us, and they introduced the idea of using the food banks. But in talking with staff who actually administer the programs and the food banks, so DSS doesn't actually have really any regulatory control or provide any directives to the food banks. They provide the federal food. So that is their relationship with the food banks. And like I said, it's about 48 of them, but there are thousands. So we really wanted to be able to expand the reach. And to be honest, a few of the food banks did say that they would have a challenge maybe themselves. I mean, they were the ones that said, you know, we really can't store these books. We don't have the space. I think they're happy to partner with us, although it may not be absolutely every single food bank. I think certain food banks will be more interested and more able to immediately work with us to get this done. And so that's why we would look to a local entity who can who knows the landscape in that county or region to be able to reach out to the food banks and connect with them and get it done in the way that works best. I mean, some food banks may have the staff to be able to distribute the books themselves when the food goes out. And some may say, you know, that's going to be really hard for us, but we would love it if you would come set up a table a couple times a month and pass out books to families that come in. So it just really gives us a lot more options. But no, it is definitely not as simple as we had originally thought. And so there are some challenges, but I think that the food banks are very interested, and certainly the Department of Social Services is very interested in this partnership. So we would like to move forward with it, but it's just a little bit of a different model than we had originally planned.
It's really helpful. Thank you.
Other comments? Yes.
Yeah, so I have a couple, I guess, questions, and then also just to clarify. So one thing I know about food banks is that primarily they are not interfacing with the end user, right? With families. Families are not going to food banks to pick up food, but it really is food pantries and other community-based organizations that are coming, getting food, and then providing them at their smaller food pantries or other community-based distributions. So the idea that families would come to food banks to get books, I don't think is realistic based on what I know in the 2 large food banks that serve hundreds of thousands of people in San Diego County. And then the other thing that I'm struggling with is as I think back to previous conversations about providing books to families, we spent a lot of time learning about the little by little model, really talking about that it's not just the book, but the book in conjunction with other services, right? Whether it's within the context of a WIC setting or somewhere else. And so I am struggling with just a book, especially during these during this crisis. When is it going to make the difference we really seek? And I'm just not sure. And I'm wondering so my question is so I'm hearing that DSS and Kim Johnson are supportive of this, which is wonderful. Did they come to us or did we go to them? I'm trying to understand the genesis of this idea and where it came from.
Actually, Kim, Ann O'Leary asked Kim to talk to me about ways that we could do things together in supportive ways, and about early childhood in a wide range of things. And she came up with the idea of using the food banks. And she basically said that we're already distributing food to all these families, and it would be a really wonderful thing if we could also distribute books. So I did not know until this microsecond that that part was not quite as clean as I thought it would be. What I really believe is that we know from the Berkeley studies that the average Hispanic child in California is 6 months behind at age 4 and stays behind for life. And we know from the Berkeley study of those thousands and thousands of Hispanic families that 40% of the families had books in the home, and those 40% had 60% of their kids learning ready, and everybody else was 30% learning ready. So the family, that 40% that had learning ready kids, didn't have any coaching or counseling or teaching. They didn't have support teams teaching them. They just had books. But they had loving families and they had books, and they basically were reading to the kids. So the difference was in that research, it was reading to the kids. And ideally, when you get a book into the home, you have some other coaching. But I've been in a number of settings and I've watched very low-income kids get books for the first time, and both the mothers and the children crying with joy because they had no books in their lives, and it makes a difference. And we know from a couple of studies that when the mothers have books in the homes, the violence levels go down significantly. And one of the Florida studies showed that not only did the violence level go down when the mother read to the kids, but some mothers converted from being aggressors to being protectors of the kids just from the reading process. And that wasn't about having coaching, that was literally having the loving interaction with the kid that's centered around the book. So it's a combination. I personally believe that optimally you get a ton of nurse-family partnership kinds of support, but it's also all of the families in America that have high levels of learning ready kids also have a lot of books, and they don't have that level of coaching. So I don't think we necessarily need that level of coaching, but I think we do need to get books. And we know that over half the low income homes don't have a single book. And so and Kim Johnson also has some sense of those problems. And she really said clearly that she wanted the kids to have brain development in the books. And she literally talked about the bundle of joy that would be handed over to each parent when they could go home from that setting with those books that they could read to their kids. So that's the chronology. I personally have I've written books on this topic. I've given speeches on this topic. I've done a ton of work in this topic. So, and I've worked with 0 to 3 fairly extreme levels. And I've also worked with the Harvard Center for Developing Child and also with Vince Folletti and the ACEs people in this space. So this is all an area that has been a passion and a commitment and a conviction of mine for a long time. Everybody knows that. It's not a secret. And so I was really delighted when Kim said, let's get these books out through along with the food. So that's kind of the context for it. I don't think there's been any, and Governor Newsom, before he was governor, he and I talked about the kid issue a number of times. And he said when he was governor that he absolutely guaranteed that on his watch, books would go out to kids, and he would make that happen. And he told Chris in my presence to make that happen. So I actually, he gets the science. He did a magnificent video speech on that and understands it. So as an administration, that, and Ann O'Leary, of course, is a very supportive book. So that's kind of the total agenda for this. And, but I did not know that that part wasn't going to work. So I'm wondering but I also believe that if those kids don't get books from some source, they're toast. They were going to do exactly what happens to, I mean, the fact that the majority of the kids are 6 months behind at age 4 is going to be even worse going forward with COVID. And so we've got to do something to help those kids. Yeah.
I just wanted to ask a question about this distribution problem, because this is something that's kind of come up very suddenly. It was just yesterday. George was not aware of it. Aaron, is it your impression that Kim Johnson didn't fully appreciate the way the food pantries worked? Or did she think to herself, oh, this will work. I know how the food pantries work. You know, people come to, I mean, the food, yeah, the people come and then they go to the pantry and they get distributed, and it's it waterfalls, like a wholesale to resale. Do you think that it was a misunderstanding, or do you think that people thought, no, this is fine, because just as you get a great big thing of oranges and you divide it, you'll get a whole big thing of books, and you'll take that to your smaller distribution point, and it'll really be fine. That's just how it works. Which was it?
I can't really speak to that because I did not speak with Kim myself. I just know that we had initially thought that we would administer from the state level and that we would ship the pallets of books. We sort of have been peeling the layers of this back, like a little bit like an onion, trying to get costs for things like shipping and for books and everything. So I'm not sure where the sort of misunderstanding was there, but it looks like Camille has a comment.
So I did talk to Kim, who George is absolutely right in that her support for us finding a way to work together to accomplish this goal is absolutely there. I truly don't know how she was thinking about it, only to say, here's a partnership that we should explore in how to get books out. Clearly, we all thought, well, that's good, we'll give them the books and that will go. But just having worked in state service for a long time, when you finally get down to the people who are actually doing it, sometimes it's a little bit different than how we hope it will come down. But here's what I want to say. We are really committed to working with them. While I know this is different than maybe what we had thought about initially, it's different. So, okay, we'll take it. We'll make it work. Books will get to kids through food banks. If we need to work with another partner, we will. We can do this. So, and I know social services is on board to say, how can we support you? How can we work with you? And throughout the state, there are different relationships within counties, and they will help us figure that out. So I guess that's what I want to say. We know it's important for books to get to kids. We think this is a good way to do it, using a partnership with food banks. It's maybe not the direct we ship, you give that we thought, but that doesn't mean it won't happen. And that doesn't mean it can't happen. So it sometimes you just get a different path than maybe how we all anticipated it would happen. But we can figure it out. The thing about it is this call happened yesterday afternoon, okay? And so then all of a sudden, we're having to rethink what we're doing. So I apologize, George, I didn't call because we were working really hard to get something in place that you all received very late last night, and we acknowledge that. So, but trying to solve and move ahead. And we know we're going to work closely. If you all decide to go forward with this, we're going to work really closely with social services and with those folks who do it. And that could include the association, the Food Bank Association. It might. But we're I'm very optimistic.
You know, it sounds, Camille, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Go ahead. Sorry.
I just love what you're saying, and I think it's exactly the right spirit to bring to the issue that we're facing. Again, we're in the middle of an emergency. Let me just ask you this: what has come to my mind is that instead of something simple, immediate, emergency, get it out this summer, we'll get it done, it'll be a big thing in the middle of a crisis to really buoy up families in a terrible time, and it's a good time to do it. Instead of it being quite that easy, it's going to be slower in some places than others. Some people will be ready, some people won't be. It'll be a little bit sticky here. There'll be more trial and error to it. Do you feel that there will be at least, say, a third to a half of the books that will get out this summer and the next, by September?
Wow. I hate to make promises I can't keep. I would say our goal would be to get a third of the books out. Just remember, 64,000 books are right now going out through Bonito.
Okay, so that's good.
64,000 books that are going to be distributed over the next, with the supplies. And we've done that. One of the other things we came across yesterday when we spoke with Fraser, which we have to keep doing, is there are not a lot of publishers who have that many books to just ship out. So we're going to have to go with, we're going to have to look at different publishers. We're going to have to look at different packages of books to be able to do that. The good thing, on the good news side, I think, is using some existing funding from Fraser. We already have some flexibility there and can go forward. So we can get started quicker than maybe with other funding that would be there. The other thing, we'll work with the association to find out who is ready. Where are the, and working with the food bank folks at DSS, who is ready? Who can do this now? And we need to figure that out. And let's start with them. Let's start with who can do it and get those books out there. Mm-hmm. That's what I would say about it.
Okay.
Do you have other questions?
Other comments? Other questions? Chris? Did you raise your hand?
Yeah, I did. Thank you. Even if we put aside the complications with distribution and production, and we take on its face the research supports this very exact specific intervention, the place I still feel really hung up is that almost 40% of the money is in administrative costs. And I know there's a lot inside of that. It's not an administrator. These are it's costs associated with distribution. And so I guess when I think about, okay, go on faith, research, it'll all come together. People will do what they can. Renee will scramble. Director Johnson will do a heroic job. There's still quite a bit of money being used on administrative costs. And so my question is, did we find the right distribution partner for this particular thing? Or did we maybe think we did and maybe we didn't? And was Supply Bank actually the better partner for this than this new partner would be, given what you learned last night? And would it reduce the 1.9 to 0.9 or something that would let us spend another $1 million on the actual books, or in the case of our other item, food. Because I think 1.9 is a huge, it's a very high percentage for overhead compared to most anything else we would approve. So I bring it back to say, if we've learned something, would it be less if it were a different distribution partner? Sounds like they're moving at Supply Bank.
Mm-hmm. So you're suggesting that we do it and have Camille and staff look at whether or not that is the optimal distribution partner.
Perhaps there's I think what you learned last night is significant. It's substantive. And, whatever it is that is approved or isn't, I think that's a big area of additional due diligence that you were going to have to do. You didn't have time to do it. You still have to do it. I don't know if the commission can move forward without knowing what that line item is, but I think it's very high.
You know what though? I think I would disagree with that, because all you have to do is divide that number into the number of books. And that's the only number that's relevant. And the administrative cost per book is the number. It's not a separate, this isn't a legislative line item debate. This is an actual functional thing. And so when you do a functional thing, you actually take the cost and divide it by the product. And by the product, that number is quite low. And so as a chunk, as a political number, it might have some relevance, but as a functional number, you just divide by the number of books. And that's how you get is that an appropriate amount of money to spend per book in administration? And the difference between that, given the number of books, and a slightly different number would be pennies. And anytime you get into pennies, you need to apply judgment as opposed to just optics. And I think we need to go beyond optics into judgment on this one. So if we look at it as a line, if we cost per book, but I totally agree. We should figure out whether or not there's a way of doing it that has a lower total administrative cost. But I don't think.
We go back to Benito's chart that showed what you get for $1 million.
Right.
It isn't pennies. It's $1 million.
Wait, I have a difficulty with the discussion here between Chris and George, because I just don't buy that these are administrative expenses as we usually understand them. They got called administrative expenses as if the product was a book sitting in a warehouse back at the place it was manufactured. It's not an administrative expense to ship the book, pack the book, unpack the book, get the book into the, that is not administrative. That's not the image of bean counter sitting in a room, doing spreadsheets. It's really creating the product. It's producing the product. So that's not what I would say is the major concern. The major concern is just that it's not really, again, we're looking at something where the ground is shifting underneath us. Again, it's an emergency meeting. This is the kind of stuff that happens. And I keep looking at that Fraser contract and the fact that we have $1.5 million in there, right? That we can redeploy immediately, right?
2.1, I think.
Yep. Yeah.
Okay, 2.1. All right, that's even better. Okay, so we could approve 2.1 million on just to redeploy it. You're already working with Renee. It would enable you to go back to Kim and say, Kim, we like this idea. There were lots of questions about the fine tuning of it, but we want to roll up our sleeves and start it and see if we can make it work. And they're giving us 2.1 million redeploying from another contract. And if we can get the kinks out of it, there will be more likely. I mean, that's a logical way of proceeding, in a storm.
Yeah,
that's my motion. My motion is that we redeploy the 2.1 from the Fraser contract today and take up the rest of this idea at the June meeting, when we will have more information both about this and about Benito and everything else we need to know more about.
Erin, I didn't think it was 2.1. Sorry, I was looking back from Fraser. I thought it was.
My understanding was that it was just slightly under 1.5 million, but I have not myself looked at that contract.
Sorry. That's what I thought too. Just so we're clear, that's what we're talking about. So.
Do you
sorry,
think,
I'm
does
just reading
anybody,
the fiscal analysis. It says 1.9 and 2.1. But whatever the amount is fine. Whatever it should be, it's fine.
Yeah, we can make that. Okay, that's the motion.
And just for,
yes.
just for clarity, because we already have approved the Fraser contract and this is an appropriate use of the existing flexibility we have, I don't believe we need to make a commission motion on it because that would be an administrative process that we would engage in. So because the previous contract was approved, I think what we're saying is we would already take that Fraser monies and do that consistent with the book ask. And then if you are going to approve anything else, that would be something that would be voted on by the commission.
okay, then do you think, Frank, I should withdraw the motion and just turn it into a comment about, well, how does everybody else feel about this?
I think that's appropriate, Molly. I think that if you agree with that direction, then Camille can go ahead and contact Fraser Communications and have that implemented administratively.
Okay.
Camille, do you agree with that?
Yes, I think what we're looking for, if you're just thinking about the Fraser contract, we just need direction from the commission, can give us direction to go forward. And I agree.
Okay, that's the recommendation. How does that sound to the commission? Work? Okay.
I saw Shana put her thumb up.
All right. Okay, we have a direction on that. Should we move to our next agenda item then?
Yeah. Do you want to?
The next
do you
agenda.
want to take any public comment, George?
Yeah. Any public comment on that?
Yeah. It's same lady from Santa Clara, I think it was, First 5 Early Learning.
Okay.
Santa Clara, First 5 Early Learning.
And then we have a second one after that.
Okay. Is she there?
Her hand's up. Can you switch her over? Give us 1 second.
Who was it?
First 5 Early Learning.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah. Thank you.
There she is.
Okay.
You're muted.
Hi there.
There
This
you
is
go.
Wendy again with Santa Clara County First 5 on behalf of Jolene Smith. Thank you for such a robust conversation and really working through this important item around access to books and in this particular emergency. I would just want to offer for your consideration that this is happening. We are actually distributing books in partnership with food distribution, in partnership with school districts and superintendents, in partnership with the city. The libraries have actually, our county and city libraries cleared their basements and gave us the books. We have been doing it. We actually have been putting together family activity kits that go with it called calming kits that really address trauma. And they're going out in our distribution next. And along with training for the family childcare providers in connection to their children and families. So it can be done. You guys can do it. We're going to be here to deliver it. That's what we want to say. Thank you so much.
Wonderful. Great
Thank
news.
you.
Very well done.
We have one more comment, George.
John Sims again from the association.
John Sims.
Okay. John.
There he is.
You're on mute, apparently.
Yeah, there he goes.
Okay, I guess last time I had a face for radio, but this time I'm on the big screen. First of all, my comments, I hope you'll keep in mind throughout my comments that the association and its memberships are always in support of anything that will promote literacy. So This certainly is a pivot in terms of what we thought was going to be happening with this program. And I will indicate that as I look at the staff report, it looks to me as if this will generate 1.8 million books that will be distributed out through the community, throughout the state, which is terrific. Some of the things that I think we'll want to have a conversation with First Five California about is I'm hearing that First Fives or libraries could be the ones receiving these books and then distributing them. We'll be interested in how they're designated, how they're chosen, what the application process will be. Also, I heard something about printing costs for counties will be part of the 1.9 million in administrative costs. So I want to explore that. And maybe I misheard something. It's my understanding that the First Fives, if they participate, would end up storing and distributing these materials, and exactly how big they're going to be, and if they can handle it with the other materials you're already supplying, we'll want to explore. I heard about an administrative cost of $33,000 per county. Probably you didn't intend that was going to go to the counties, but I'm going to be interested in exploring that. And then finally, just reminding you that the counties are operating other book programs already, as you know, and those book programs are very heavily predicated on family engagement. And if the counties get involved again, that's a hallmark of their programs now. I think they're going to want to try to explore possibilities of incorporating the family engagement, just like you've been concerned about as they participate in this program. So just a couple of overarching ideas. Camille and I tried to go 24 hours without talking to each other. We realize now that we're unable to do that. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Much appreciated.
Chris, did you have your hand up?
Sorry, I don't. Let me take it down. Hang on.
Sorry.
No, it's okay.
Sorry. Just want to check in.
Oh, is that what having your hand up looks like?
We thought she had her hand up, but she didn't.
Oh.
Okay.
All right.
Sorry
I was
about
stretching my back.
Let us move to the next item on this agenda. Supporting stabilization and rebuilding of early learning and care.
Right. This is I just want to check in with all of you because it's now, we have like less than 10 minutes before 4 o'clock. We had slotted this 1 to 4, thinking that we would do that. I just want to check in with commissioners to say, do you want to continue? Do you want us to schedule before the June budget session? Would you like us to schedule another conversation just to do this one, just to finish this meeting? And we could do that quickly. Just what's your pleasure, knowing the time? Shana?
I do have a hard stop at 4 o'clock because I won't have childcare after then.
That's important.
There you go.
Others?
Well, that does it for me. I mean, we can't go on without Shana, so.
Should we try to, can we cover this topic? How long do you think this topic will take? And number one, and number two, isn't this kind of a tee up for the big agenda that we're going to be talking about in June?
It is, really. It is that. And given that I thought the first I would take 30 minutes, yes, I would say this is a big one and you all have a lot of thoughts about it. So I would schedule at least 90 minutes for that, if not 2 hours. But
in June or now? You mean the special meeting?
Within the next week or so.
There you go.
Folks.
Okay, and let me ask the commission, would you like to try to convene a couple-hour meeting, 90-minute meeting in the relatively immediate future?
Yes.
Yes.
So yes, any other people? Okay.
We would still just, and Frank, I'm going to ask you, can we just continue the meeting to a different time and date? So we will just be using the same information that has already been given to you. and we will just come back and conclude the meeting. Does
So
that
we will recess the meeting, not adjourn it.
Okay.
Frank?
Sounds good to me.
The meeting is about
Yeah,
to be
sounds good to me.
recessed until another time certain. But before we do that, the topic itself, though, we should talk a little bit about what we're trying to do here is figure out what are the creative things that we can do to add value to the whole childcare world in coaching, advising, support, infrastructure, whatever. What are the things that we can do where we can go to the centers and help them survive, the ones that are about to die, prop them up, what can we do in that space? And we can talk about that at the next meeting, but that was what we're intending to tee up with this topic on this agenda when we set up the agenda. Does that make sense?
I thought it was a little broader than that, George. I mean, didn't it also involve a sort of
Yes.
interagency? Yeah, right.
Yes.
Cooperation and
Yep. Yes.
structural issues. Yeah.
Yeah, structural issues, interagency. Who should we be allying with, and what should we be doing going forward? Because we have this precious resource that we need to figure out how to treasure it and optimize it going forward. Yes.
Yeah.
But that is sort of the topic of the June meeting that we are now going to be setting up.
Okay.
Well, it'll be good. We'll continue this meeting, and we'll therefore have 3 different topics we will have worked pretty hard on and given a lot of thought to. And then by the time we get to the actual meeting in June, we'll be more cooked. We'll be readier. Good.
So you will receive from us on Monday a doodle poll for both this continuance and for the June budget. Okay, so expect that on Monday.
So just on that June budget one, when we talked to Glenn Price, he would like to, the facilitator would like to factor into time to be able to talk to each one of you individually. So I think he was looking possibly the middle week of June to accomplish that, because he thinks it will inform the discussion having talked to you beforehand. So he will need time to schedule time with each of you individually. So when you think about a date in June, if you could accommodate his request, which is to actually talk to you, and I do think that that's a valuable resource to have your information at the time we have that retreat.
So, so we'll send a doodle poll on Monday, okay? With those dates.
Sounds good.
Yeah, great.
Good.
So,
Can I just thank Camille? I want to just before we adjourn too rapidly. Thank you, Frank, Aaron, Marcia, the commission. I really, really appreciate how hard you're working. It's really obvious. It's making a difference. I see how exhausting this can be. I appreciate it so much. And we get through all these things and it turns and it twists and turns and we still get things done, and it's because you're getting us there, and thank you for that.
Thank you, Chris.
Excellent.
There's one other announcement before the commission adjourns that I think Mr. Furtek wants to talk to you all for a minute.
Well, I've already talked to George and Molly, but I am going to retire.
Which is why I'm going like this, because you're not going to like it.
My last day in the office will be June 30th. So yes, thank you for everything. And I'm just ready to move on to my next chapter. So
that's great, Frank. Congrats. It's amazing.
So you can see why we're doing this.
Done great work.
Yeah, thank you, Frank. Really, I agree with Myra.
Yes, thank you.
We're really going to miss you.
Thank you, Frank.
Thank you. Yep.
So we are moving forward with positions, so you don't think we're just out there. You know, we think we are close to having an offer on the deputy for External and Governmental Affairs. Hopefully we can bring that to you soon. So
Good.
Excellent.
Okay. Okay.
All right, everybody, we did a lot of good work today, and we'll do some good work again soon.
Indeed. All right, to be continued.
Okay, everybody, be safe.
Thanks, everybody.
Be safe. Be
Bye,
safe.
everyone.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.